Welcome to the Hero Maker podcast. I'm Andrea Schreeman, writer-director EP, living in LA.
I'm Jennifer Morrison, and I currently serve as the Commissioner of Public Safety for the state of Vermont.
We are here to seek out and tell the full story of our friends who were murdered in college, Rachel Raver and Warren Fulton III.
We really need to make sure that their deaths were not in vain and that every possible lesson and improvement for the system can be squeezed from the retelling of the circumstances that ultimately led to the identification of their killer.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Hero Maker podcast. On today's interview, Jennifer brought us one of her esteemed colleagues, Ronnell Higgins, who currently serves as Associate Vice President for Public Safety and Community Engagement at Yale University. He's also a practitioner in residence and adjunct faculty at the University of New Haven as part of the university's Center for Advanced Policing. He served as the Chief of Police and Director of Public Safety for Yale University for over 14 years. He was assistant chief before that, and he worked his way up in a bunch of different escalating titles after he began his career in policing at Yale in 1997. Ronnell has a unique expertise in creating forethought and safety planning for universities. And Yale, being this blended campus with the city of New Haven, has opened up a lot of collaborative police explorations and strategies with Yale's host city. So I had truly educating experience being in this conversation with Jennifer and with Ronnell. They're old buddies and they were mind melding. They have similar position on a lot of topics. But I would think that any university who has a real commitment, meaning they want to be innovative and they want to do something that is forward thinking in terms of their public safety, would really benefit from not only hearing this conversation, but from reaching out to Ronnell about his work at Yale and possibly about his consulting practice. I'm really excited for you to hear this beautiful conversation with a beautiful man who has had a really compelling career and really brought a lot of truth and vulnerability to this conversation. This is Ronnell Higgins.
Do you want to know how Ronnell and I know each other?
Yes, please.
The way we met was that we were both members of the FBI National Academy 226th class, which is a 11-week program for police professionals down at Quantico, Virginia. And it is truly one of the most memorable parts of my career, in part just because of the people you meet and the relationships you develop. And these relationships have lasted since then, since 2006. And you leave there with friends, with contacts to bounce ideas off, best practices. But Ronnell was one of my faves, so we've stayed in touch.
Yeah, so it was 2006, the summer, July.
It was hot.
And it was hot. I arrived at the FBI NA. I was a lieutenant at the time. I fought to get there, and then I get there and I arrive, and I don't know anybody. And after a while, tribes start to develop, and you start to meet people. And I'll just get to it. There's certain people in my class, in the NA 226 class, that I kept in touch with for a lot of reasons. But Jen stood out immediately because, quite frankly, I thought she was and think she's brilliant. So I'm serious. I had like a nerd crush on Jen. I was like, everything she said, I was like, yeah, what she said. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And no, really, you meet some people sometimes and that really impress you in so many ways. It was just like, where have you been? It's like, that's what I'm talking about. But honestly, I've also kind of followed her career and just try to keep up with. We don't have to talk every day. We don't have to talk every 6 months. We don't have to talk each year. But I know that if I call Jen, I'm like, Jen, let me ask you a question. She's tracking. You know how some people know how to figure out complicated things? We all know people who can figure out complicated things, and an auto mechanic can figure out something that's complicated. But those people who thrive in complexity, that's who I roll with. And Jen she gets it. She gets it. You can read a book and figure out how to take apart an engine and put it back together. That's complicated. But the complex portion of it, that's Jen. It's like it's almost a different channel we're on, you know?
That sounds amazing.
See, we can just stop here. Love Fest continues.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
We were actually in some of the same classes in the NA, and they're all college level classes. So they're discussion based and drawing on the experiences and of people in their professional lives, and then bringing it into the academic setting, mid or late career for many people. It really is an incredible exchange of information that happens. And he's right. Ronnell and I just clicked right away. And I was like, man, too bad we couldn't figure out how to bring that synergy into the same workplace. We would have ruled the world.
Amen.
Yeah, we have to spread out your goodness a little bit.
So why don't we do our first question, Ronnell? Tell us about you and your career and how you got to where you are.
So thank you for having me. My name is Ronnell Higgins. I am currently the Associate Vice President for Public Safety and Community Engagement at Yale University. I am in my 25th year, soon to be 26, at Yale University. I knew nothing about higher education, public safety, or higher education policing before coming here. My dad was a New Haven police officer. He retired as a lieutenant in the early 90s, actually about 95. And I grew up wanting to be a New Haven police officer. My dad was my hero. I used to watch my dad get dressed, put that uniform on. I knew at an early age what I wanted to be and who I wanted to be like, and was my dad. My dad retired early, heartbroken, because my brother was brutalized by the same police officers that he worked with and from the same police department in the early 90s. So when we talk about duty to intervene post George Floyd, my father, after this happened, gave voice to my brother's situation and took steps to make sure that injustice wouldn't stand. And as a result, he lost his command and he was removed from the street, never see the street again. So at that point in time, even though I wanted to be a police officer, I stepped away and said, I want nothing to do with policing. So I joined the Connecticut Department of Corrections. And I became a correction officer. And I did that job for about 3.5 years and I loved it. Andrea, I thrived in that role, but I always felt that I was being called to do something else, called to do something more. And I went to my dad and I said, I want to be a police officer. He said, you should. Policing needs you. So I went to that very police department where my dad worked, where I grew up, where I went to Christmas parties and union parties. And I stood in line because we didn't have computers at the time. I stood in line and filled out an application. And while I was there, it was kind of like, are you Reggie's son? Hey, how's your family? How's your dad? Now, mind you, my brother had won his civil case against the police department for close to $1 million by now. So the Higgins name was kind of in the mud, but I just kind of felt time had passed in 1996 and it was time to kind of just make a run at it. So I filled out my application believing that everything was going to be fine, met some other cops' kids who I had grown up with and lost contact with. So we were like already forming packs. We're going to go to the academy together. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And my phone never rung, Andrea, that yellow phone with the long cord in the kitchen that my mother could be down the hall on. And,
no, I had one. Rung. I had one. I know that phone.
It never rung. So it became evident that my application was lost or thrown out. And I just got sour again. I said, I don't want anything to do with policing. So my dad recommended that I continue to apply to police department. So I did that. And he said, and you should apply to Yale too, because they're growing their police department. Andrea, the only thing I knew about Yale University was the Yale Bowl, because I had gone to some football games there, and the Peabody Museum, because as a kid, I went there on field trips, But because of my lived experience up until that point, I said the first police department that gives me a chance, I'm going to go with them, and I'm going to be loyal to them, and I'm going to show the city of New Haven what they could have had. And I received calls over the years, even while in the academy. And I just said, no, I stuck with Yale, and I'm glad that I did. And one of the reasons I'm so glad that we're here today to talk about this is because I've seen tragedy in my 25 years on a college campus. I've seen tragedy on a large scale and on a small scale. And I do believe that the work that we're doing is our work to do. It's going to take folks like us to think critically, not just about the core competencies of a campus police leader should be, or what they are now, but what they should be today, given the complexity of the threat environment and the complexity at which young people are growing up in this world today and all the things that they have to deal with.
Yeah, it's a really different time than when we came on the job. And I can only imagine the changes you've seen in small p, small s, public safety on the campus or campus safety since the time you came on the job in the mid 90s.
Yeah. We were once in a 4-family house when I first got hired on, because campus policing was thought of just kind of as an afterthought. And now we're in a complex facility that rivals some of the small to medium-sized departments in the state of Connecticut. We have 93 police officers, 24-hour dispatch center. I mean, you name it, we have it. It's an amazing operation that has grown and is continuing to grow. But it wasn't like the university just woke up one morning and said, we're going to invest in policing. Andrea, I coined the term tragedy trumps tradition. In the early 90s, a young Yale student by the name of Kristen Prince was shot dead on our campus during the course of a robbery. And after that occurred, the Police Foundation was brought in to do an assessment of safety at Yale and learned that the safety apparatus or all of our infrastructure was woefully inadequate, which led us to where we are now. But there's been other tragedies along the way that have also helped us grow. And I can get into that.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, and we will get into some of those, by the way, 'cause that's how we teach the next generation, is through examples of best practices, but also the times we slammed our foot in the door and didn't need to do it another time. But when I heard what you said about the complex environment that young people are coming to college in now, everything's different than when we were going to college campuses as students. How important is it for students to feel safe on campus? Like, what are the ramifications when students don't feel safe?
So I'll begin with the latter. What are the ramifications when students don't feel safe? One of the things students do is they take their safety into their own hands. Now, we want them to have some agency in their own safety, but at the same time, I don't want students walking around with pepper spray and knives and weapons. They're here to live, learn, and grow, not to be the first responders. The other ramification is you won't get students, because think about it, parents, we all have to make value decisions about where we're going to send our sons and our daughters. Another ramification is, listen, you're not going to get the researchers, you're not going to get the thought leaders to come and work on your campus. So just like a town, people need to know that they can come to work and feel safe. People need to know that they can sit in a classroom and feel safe. People need to know that safety is a priority. There can be no learning without a safe campus. It just can't happen. Yeah,
it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're so focused on walking safely between classrooms or from your living space to your next activity, it's hard to learn when you're hyper-focused on threats.
I noticed that Yale is a closed campus, right? And I'm just assuming you don't have gates around it, or maybe you do.
No.
When did that get instituted? Like, when was that declared that we're a private closed campus, that you're either staff or you're a student or you're a guest of staff or student? And then how do you maintain that?
So the story of the Yale Police Department is very interesting. We are the first campus police department in the United States. As the story has it, back in 1894, some medical students at the time, and it was all male, were accused of digging up bodies in New Haven cemeteries and using them as cadavers. This didn't go over too well with the townspeople in the city of New Haven. So that was, again, 1894, a town gown rift. So the president of Yale and the then mayor of the city of New Haven got together to try to solve the problem. They figured that if 2 New Haven police officers would come and walk the campus, which wasn't very big at the time, would come over and just walk the campus at night, they can keep the boys in line. Many people thought it would fail, but it didn't. These 2 officers were beloved to the point where Yale University back in the 1890s hired them away from the city of New Haven. And that's how the Yale University Police Department was born. Since then, Yale, in terms of its geography, has grown exponentially. There are no gates or rolling green hills or pastures. It's just not there. Yale University is woven into the tapestry of the city of New Haven. It is difficult to discern what is Yale and what is New Haven. And the only real way you can determine sometimes is by some of the signs on the buildings. Some of the buildings at Yale are interdigitated with Yale New Haven Hospital. So it's difficult to discern which Yale New Haven Hospital, which is a totally separate organization. So it really looks like Yale University is downtown New Haven to a degree, but it's not. There's much more to downtown New Haven. So it's an open urban campus. And keeping a campus safe an open campus in an urban environment, it's a challenge, especially when you have a city of 130,000. In 2012, I think we had 30 homicides. That's a lot. That's a lot, especially when the wealth disparity in this area is so vast. In some ways, haves and have-nots. You have some people that are very wealthy, doing pretty well. Then you have some people who aren't doing very well. And I'll leave you with this. New Haven has 10 policing districts. Just under 60% of the violent crime in the city of New Haven occurs within the 5 policing districts which abut the campus. So when you think of violent crime, you think of homicides, non-fatal shootings, sexual assaults, robberies, assaults. It all impacts how people feel about safety, which we just talked about.
Yeah, so it's not like a campus within a city. It is completely
Intermeshed with the
intertwined,
city, yeah.
intermeshed with the city. So that, in establishing a sense of place in your campus community must have been a bit of a challenge.
Oh,
it must continue to be.
It is. That's why I love my new role. So I served as chief of police for 11 years. And my new role as AVP of Public Safety and Community Engagement, I'm like the orchestrator between the campus, public safety, and the university, so to speak, in the city of New Haven. So last night I found myself at City Hall at a workshop on electric vehicles and electric scooters and things like that. So, yeah, because as we're all pushing sustainability, right? But what we haven't factored in is, especially when it comes to these scooters, is if you plug them into a building, they're drawing some serious electricity, but you kind of have to live in both worlds. Even though my paycheck says Yale University and I'm accountable to the university, when you have a private police department that's performing a public function, you have to have some accountability to that host city as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm really curious about the community engagement piece and how, obviously it's important, but how important is it to what you're rolling out, what you're creating, the success of your programs, and how does it play a factor?
Yeah, so the community engagement piece is brand new. And I call it, of the 4 verticals that I oversee, it's the 5th vertical. So we have to find areas of opportunity to meet members of our community, key stakeholders of our community groups, where they are in supporting them as well. And also, as in terms of public safety, how can we support public safety initiatives of mutual concern? How can we leverage the thought leadership that we have at Yale University? How can we leverage, I don't want to say the wealth, but let's just be real here. How can we help support financially some of these endeavors in a way that makes sense as well? I do feel that as a front-facing unit, our public safety, all 275 of us, only 93 are police officers, the other are university security officers and other staff. We need to be meeting the city where they are and doing some community engagement on things that make sense.
Okay, I get that. What about the student engagement piece? How does that factor in?
Sure. So, the student engagement piece is tricky. It shouldn't be, but it is. Because on the one hand, we have students that want to engage and we do engage. But something happened with students on campuses over the last few years. When I first became the chief of the Yale Police Department, I used to stand up at orientations and talk about how we're a full-fledged police department, how we're well-trained, how we're this, how we're that, how we're pro-student, and we're here for them. And to gain legitimacy, Jen, we used to say, we're just like the police department where you're from. Students would say, oh, okay, I get it, yeah. Then something happened. I'll never forget. I think it was 2015. I was doing a orientation for a drama school, myself and another African-American captain at the time. I did my spiel, and I said, we're just like the police department wherever you're from. But think about what was happening in 2015. I had a Black drama student raise his hand and say, Chief, we appreciate your words, but I have a question. How do I protect my Black body from your police officers? And I'm like, whoa, I had never had that question asked of me. And then it was a cascading effect. Another student raised his hand and says, yeah, Chief Higgins, you said your police department is just like the police department where I'm from. Well, I'm from Baltimore.
Oops.
And another student says, yeah, I'm from Chicago. And we began to realize that the fact that students bring their lived experiences, okay, either direct or indirect, to the campus, and those lived experiences help form the opinion of your police department, that mattered. So when trying to engage with students for a period of time, it was kind of tough. And we've had some incidents on our campus, one of which wherein the son of a New York Times reporter was stopped. An officer had drawn his gun during the stop. That made national news. We had a story that was called Sleeping While Black. A white female student knowingly called the police on a student who she knew belonged there, weaponizing the police. That made us look really, really bad. And one of my officers was involved in a shooting in 2019 off campus involving an unarmed black couple. And at the same time, think about it. You're 18, 19, 20 years old. You're rallying for the cause, right? I was 18 once. So these students want to be a part of the national conversation. Now they have something. And they brought the abolish the police, to defund the police, and the disarm YPD movement to our campus. And it still exists to this day.
Yeah, it's been difficult few years in American policing for a variety of reasons. And all of what you said is part of it. You said something that really struck me as a parallel to Rachel and Warren's case.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about these students arriving at campus with their own lived experience. And I want to spin this away from their racial identity or their city affiliation.
Mm-hmm.
For me and for many of my teammates, we arrived in Big Bad Washington, D.C. with no experience with city life or police interactions. We brought a relatively high level of naivete based on where we grew up and played soccer. And here we were in a super urban area, still feeling pretty good, running back and forth all times of the day and night, sometimes by ourselves between bars and other people's houses or dorms, the Smith Center where we had our athletic stuff, really cruising around. And then our friends were murdered. Rachel was raped. They were abducted and taken to another place, and their bodies were, left in a field. And it was like all of that came to a screeching halt. And that veil was torn, the naivete. And all of a sudden we were confronted with the realities that it could happen anywhere. It could happen in rural America, but it's more closely affiliated with urban violence. And for us, that was a huge fear maker. And I wonder if you have thoughts on cases that happen to a campus community that fundamentally alter a student's perspective on their own relationship to that city or how they go about living their daily life. We had one of our baseball colleagues who was on the baseball team with Warren say that from that day on that they found out about the murders, he never walked again after dark. He sprinted from the library to home or from the bar to home. He never walked again because he didn't want to be an easy target.
Yeah. I have so many thoughts. I mean, we can do another session just on this. I have so many thoughts because we've had some tragic situations involving students on campus. So let's just flip the lived experience thing for a second. You are correct. On the flip side, some students come to this urban campus and they don't have a lot of experience in urban America. They're used to leaving their front door open. They're used to being out at night and not having to worry about it. They're used to just kind of walking for a while and not going into a high crime area. That's not the case around here. And they're not used to seeing as many police departments. One of the biggest complaints that we've received over the years is that there's so many police, there's so many security. We feel like we're constantly being surveilled. We feel like we're being over-policed. The reality is the city of New Haven is understaffed and the services that they're providing are for the city. And we're trying to take care of the safety for the area that we're responsible for. We're not trying to surveil people. But if depending upon the time you were on this campus, like for instance, my boss is a Yale graduate. He graduated in the early 80s and he can recall something like what you're describing, Jen, walking the gauntlet to go from one area to another. Things have changed, but that was his experience at the time. And I can show you the UCR statistics from that period of time, and it was bad. I mean, we had close to 100 robberies at any given. I mean, it was bad. So over time, we've managed to reduce crime. And we've done that not just through our police department and our partnerships with the city and security and better infrastructure, but we've also done that by investment in New Haven and opening up our doors to the city of New Haven. I think we can do a better job at that. But the social contract, as I call it, changes when a Sentinel event happens.
Yep.
It changes. And it puts us as police leaders in a really tough place, because the first question that I'm asked, bar none, year after year when I do parent orientation is, Chief, we hear about all these different things that you're doing, but what specifically are you going to do to keep my kids safe? We read about this. We heard about that. Where should they not go? Think about it. And there's been times where our officers have said, oh, don't go this way, go that way. Da, da, da. And the city of New Haven hears about it. People hear about it and say, oh, why are you saying that? You're giving us a bad rap. You're making people think that the city is not safe. We have to be very thoughtful about how we describe the city. It's an amazing city, but there's risks anywhere.
I wish in retrospect that I had a little bit more perspective on what city life really meant, because I came from a very small town in New Hampshire, as did several of my classmates, not from New Hampshire, but from other states. And there really was no City Living 101. There was no primer for how to keep your head on a swivel, don't be an easy target. None of these things were ever taught. And then all of a sudden this huge Sentinel event happens, and it really fundamentally changed our relationship with the university and how we felt about GW and our experience there. Not that the university could have done anything about a serial murder taking them, but that is the imprint that this huge life-shifting event happened during our time on that campus.
And you just were starting to say something, Ronnell, about the social contract. And I am really curious about, maybe you could even just have a modern conversation about what are you noticing about the social contract right now?
So right now, it is evident that everyone wants to feel safe. So let me back up before I get into that, though. One of the things that we did in 2019, after my officer was involved in an off-campus shooting, we published our patrol area, our defined patrol area. Why do I say that? Because it was an unwritten rule that we would support the City of New Haven Police Department within reason off campus in certain areas. They needed our backup. We're there. After the shooting, activists came together. People said, yeah, we see the Yale police here and we see the Yale police there. And the other town comes into our city too. And there's this triple occupation. We're being occupied by all these police. Yale needs to keep their police here. And we said, hold on for a second. We're supporting the city of New Haven. And the police chief at the time was like, yeah, but people didn't want to hear that. So our officers are now assigned to a defined patrol area. So the social contract changed. I am now getting calls from time to time from non-Yale community members who live in areas which abut the campus and say, listen, they're breaking into cars or this happens here. Why can't we have a Yale police car just kind of do a directed patrol in this area? How come you guys don't come into this area anymore? That whole movement of activism, well, they got our attention and we responded, but who did it hurt? It hurt some of the people that needed and continue to need our presence in these areas. You know, things just change. Things just change. In terms of the social contract with students, though, I think the pendulum swung really, really far one way with the defund, disarm, abolish movement. I think it's starting to swing back somewhat to the middle right now, where students are being more reasonable about it. There's still some remnants of it, and I think that's always going to be there, and that's okay. But I think reasonableness has prevailed, and they know that we're not going to be abolished, we're not going to be disarmed. And listen, my funding, 80% of our budget is salary and benefits. So what are we going to defund?
Right. Wow.
That's good that they let off of that a little bit or a lot. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. I would love to know what you're most proud of in your career there at Yale.
If you would have asked me that before 2019, I would have said I am most proud of how we've reduced crime. And we reduced crime to the lowest levels. I mean, we've broken records during my term. We reduced crime to the lowest UCR levels since 1985. That's through partnerships, collaboration, and being smart about crime.
But that also tracks, Jen, with Bratton and his work.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there are trends. It sounds like you were on trend, but also you were doing a lot. So it's not just what's happening in the world, but how departments are employing new techniques and tactics to create those results. So congratulations. That's amazing.
And I've read the book Turnaround by Bratton twice. So yeah, so he was the model, NYPD. If you'd have asked me that, I would have talked about crime, reduction in crime, diversifying the police department, professionalizing police department equipment. If you would have asked me then, I would have said, that's what I'm most proud of. What I am most proud of since 2019 is leading this organization through a true storm, restoring credibility, continuing to make our police department a model for others to follow, and showing that when we lean in and when we listen and when we meet people where they are, oftentimes we'll find that we want the same thing. How do we operationalize our collective values to bring about community wellness? So that's what I'm most proud of.
The Hero Maker podcast would like to thank our supporter, Restaurant Olivia, located in Denver, Colorado's Wash Park neighborhood. The hospitality family at Restaurant Olivia believes that we are all here to take care of each other, one handmade pasta dish at a time. Our food is made with care and intention with locally sourced ingredients whenever possible. Our beverage program features expertly crafted, playful cocktails and an Italian-focused international wine list. Restaurant Olivia invites you to start small and let the caring spread. Visit oliviadenver.com to make your reservation or place your to-go order today.
The Williamson County Cultural Arts Commission of Franklin, Tennessee wishes to thank our men and women in blue who help us deliver safe and fun family and community cultural events year-round, including one of the only authentic bluegrass festivals in the country. Bluegrass Along the Harpeth takes place every July and at the Williamson County Fair in August and at the annual Tennessee International Independent Film Festival. Check out our full calendar of events at wccac-tn.org.
If you had to think about one of the most difficult events that you ever had to oversee on campus or be the chief of, what was the impact on campus? How did the impact radiate?
There's a couple. I'm going to give you two examples. The first still bothers me to this day. Coming up as a patrol officer and as a supervisor on a campus, campuses are steeped in tradition. We do things this way because we've always done things this way. And even as police officials, you're saying we should probably look and do things a little differently. And there was an accident in a parking lot at a tailgate at Yale. It was 2011, 2012. A young lady lost her life and another young lady was injured pretty badly. And I just wish I could have spoke up more about how I felt things should have been changed. And I just vowed I will always use my voice and push to the highest levels of this university or wherever I need to go, the mayor's office, when it comes to a public safety challenge that I feel needs to be escalated. We, as a result, partnering with NCS4 and benchmarking with other large universities, have developed a model fan safety and tailgate plan. Tragedy trumps tradition. So that's one thing. The second thing, in terms of impact, the shooting in 2019, the officer is a good, well-meaning officer. He found himself in a really difficult situation. It was just tough all the way around. It was tough standing and listening and hearing from a lot of people who look like me, who, in so many words, for a moment in time, I felt like they had lost faith in me. And that hurt. I didn't want to do this job anymore. I did not want to do this job anymore. And I'm not alone. Some of my colleagues didn't want to do the job anymore either. But I'll never forget, about a year after the incident, after George Floyd was killed, I was standing in my kitchen. My kids were sitting on the couch because they were being homeschooled because of COVID. And as I'm buttoning up my white shirt, getting ready to go to work, because there was going to be a rally that day, I was going to be out in the field, I'm watching Good Morning America. And on the TV, there's like 6 different cities, riots, marches, rallies, things are burning. It was bad. It's bad. And my kids are on the couch and they're watching Good Morning America, and they're listening to people talk about how they feel about the police and all these different things. And I can see in my daughter's eyes that she's conflicted because she wanted to get a sign and go downtown. And my son is looking, and she's looking at me. They're looking at the TV, they're looking back. And I could see that they're looking at me as I'm getting dressed, the same way I looked at my dad when he got dressed for work. And they're looking at that and they said, this is bad. This is bad. But that's my dad. But that's my dad. So I went to work that day literally wanting to just say, you know what, I'm going to be putting in my papers. But then, so I don't know, but maybe it was God. I think it was God who said, if not you, then who?
That's right.
If not you, then who? Who's coming? I sent you to the NA. You know, you had these lived experiences just like other people had these lived experiences. I educated you. You did all these things. You're equipped. Now get out there and do your job. It just hit me. If not you, then who?
And your father told you in the beginning that policing needs you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing those 2 stories. Even the details about what you had to stand in the face of like friends and colleagues and people looking at you and looking at the color of your skin and asking, like, what side are you on? It must have been a really strong internal dilemma and pushed you to, again, find your voice and find where your voice lived in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to actually be in a unique position to, again, bridge some worlds and be the one, be the glue. And those sound like a lot of trial by fire situations. And I know it's been a rough couple of years. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Ronnell, when you think about your younger self, and you think about how far you've come and the experiences you've had, what would you tell your younger self who's just starting out in their career? What advice would you have?
This is not a race. It's a marathon.
You stole my line, dude. It is not a sprint, it's a marathon. No, mind meld. Man.
In order to run a marathon, think about the preparation. You have to train, you have to work your way up. 1 mile to 2 miles, 2 miles to 3 miles, so on. You have to hydrate, you have to practice self-care. But you also have to do a little reading and learn from other marathon runners. How did they do it? You have to take account of the terrain. The shoes matter. Decisions that you make along the way, it all matters. So it's much more than just slowing down and taking your time. It's about everything else that goes into it as well.
That was almost a little creepy that you said almost word for word some of the advice I've given my younger officers. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. I have used that dozens of times.
I think there's some validity to it.
And you just confirmed it.
I have a few more questions. One is about your prohibition of weapons position on campus. And I'm wondering, is that like a recent thing that needed to be edified with the big question of firearms on campus? Or was that something that has been in place for a long time? And was it ever a question? Like, did it have to be debated?
For as long as I can remember, there's been a prohibition of weapons on campus, except for sworn law enforcement who are actually working. So there has been some pushback over the years. Again, lived experiences. So let's say that we have a student that's coming from Utah, Okay. And I've been to campuses all over this country. I walked into a campus police department in Boise, Idaho, and they have lockers or rooms. Or if you go up to Dartmouth in New Hampshire, there's a space where they have rooms where you can, store your rifle at the police department. Students can store their weapons on campus. So depending upon where you're from, possessing weapons is a part of life. Whereas here, there's no weapons allowed. So from time to time, there's pushback. But listen, the number one crime on this campus, as with most urban campuses, is theft. So if we know that there's a high level of theft, for me, one, I don't want weapons to be stored poorly and then stolen. The other thing is we want a safe campus. We know that young people sometimes make bad decisions. We don't want to introduce weapons into that mix either. And this goes for employees as well. Employees should not have to worry about being intimidated or feeling threatened by their coworker who has a concealed firearm on their hip or somewhere close by either. So I am for that policy. It's been tough, though. There's been a lot of push as of lately because Second Amendment groups sometimes will come and test the water. So what does that look like? There's no weapons allowed on campus. But as you heard me say earlier, this is an open urban campus. So you can be standing outside an academic building on a sidewalk with a 357 Magnum on your belt. And that's not campus. That's city property. And they're well within their right to do so. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge. But, again, goes back to social contract. The social contract here at Yale is in alignment with the institutional policy. There's not a lot of stomach for weapons on this campus.
Gosh, I hear you talk about the complexity of challenges that you're dealing with, but I feel like most of them are ubiquitous for all police departments at this time. And I just wonder if you could identify what you think are some of your unique challenges with campus safety. I know we've talked through some of them, but maybe something that we haven't addressed.
Yeah. So one of the unique challenges has to do with mental health and wellness. We know that mental health issues begin to manifest themselves more so between the ages of 18 and 22 or 23, and that's college age kids. So you introduce all sorts of social pressures, alcohol, drugs, identity. You introduce all that into the mix and voila, complexity. So the challenge that a campus police chief or campus police leaders have is to have technically competent police officers, but also police officers who understand the terrain and the challenges of higher education. Now, to be 100% transparent, the other challenge that most municipal police chiefs don't have to deal with is being responsive to campus administration, academics. No shade against academics, Jen. But, don't get me wrong. I love my job and I love where I work. I work with some really, really smart people. And I think that I'm better as a result. But knowing how to manage up in this environment with all these challenges is a challenge.
That is fascinating.
The ivory tower of academia very rarely matches the reality on the street. I mean, I've spent my career policing in college communities in Burlington with the University of Vermont and Champlain College, and over in Colchester with St. Michael's College.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely two different worlds. So finding the ability to be the pivot person between the realities of what's happening on the street and in the campus, in the dorm rooms, and the theoretical, that is a skill set that not many have. And that's probably why you lasted as a police chief for 3 times the average length of tenure of an American police chief, is because of your ability to pivot and see it from both sides.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I've valued the most about you is your outstanding interpersonal communication skills and your willingness to be vulnerable and just tell it like it is. And that's something you and I share, is to just, if it's in my head, it's probably coming out my mouth. I wondered if you could just talk to Andrea or our audience a little bit about the importance of good interpersonal skills for police officers.
Wow. So growing up as a middle child in a household with 2 older with 2 older brothers and 1 younger brother and a type A dad and a loving mom, you had to learn to negotiate. And newsflash, folks, as a Black male, I'm probably the darkest one in my family out of my brothers. All my brothers are very fair skinned. So when I was growing up, they were like, "Oh, you were adopted. You can't be their brother." I was like, I am." So I've been having to negotiate and justify my existence for a long time. So then I go to a high school where one of my best friends and myself, we're the only two Black kids in my graduating class. So I had to navigate in some spaces, and it was a great experience. I had no idea that experience was going to prepare me for coming to work at Yale. But there was one more stop along the lines, and that was the Connecticut Department of Corrections. You see, when I was in my early 20s, I'm lifting weights, I'm going to the gym, I'm running because I'm a correction officer, and if I'm going to be able to handle myself, not realizing that in there without a weapon, your interpersonal communication skills, that's your number one tool. That not only keeps you safe, but it keeps your other brother and sister officers safe as well. So coming into an environment like Yale or any higher education environment, being relatable is so important because we have to manage the inner department, the outer department, our administration, and in some instances, like today, the media. It is a skill set, and you have to commit to being a lifelong learner because, again, you asked me earlier about my younger self. If you're committed to growth and committed to learning and committed to being in touch with really smart and focused people like Jen and John Vincent and all these other folks, then you're going to grow. But you have to put the time in. You have to read something, and you have to be comfortable being in uncomfortable places in order to grow. And that's how it happens.
That was well said. Be comfortable in uncomfortable places in order to grow. I mean, I'm getting some life lessons here today. I feel like there's some phone calls I need to make after this. Okay, so here's one. What can we do better? What can you do better? What do you have your eyes set on? What do you have your heart set on? Making a difference right now.
So I'll share with you something, and this is kind of a passion project, and I think it's totally relatable. I recently did some work as a consultant at a college, and I've been doing some research as a result of the work at this college, and I'm starting to see a trend with other similarly situated colleges. And some of these colleges don't have big budgets, so they can't really afford high-priced consultants. As we look at crime in our cities, those cities with college campuses, those campuses need to understand that they need to get it together and get it together quickly before tragedy strikes on their campus. I love my job, but if there was someone who said, you know what, we're going to donate $20 million to focus on working with police chiefs and city leaders to strengthen security on college campuses. This year, we're going to do these 3 or 4 colleges. I would leave tomorrow and take on that work because it's just that important. The experiences that I've had and a few others who I talk with regularly, the experiences that we have, we should be sharing those experiences with others so they can refine their approach and ultimately improve their public safety. It's not about just hiring more police officers and security. It's about really how to develop, manage, and foster relationships with your host city, because that's ultimately how we're going to build a sustainable safety on our campuses.
So you said you're noticing a trend.
Oh, yeah.
Can you be a little bit more specific about what the trend is? Just like rising crime statistics on campus?
No, rising crime statistics in some cities.
Okay, got it.
So think about the host city, these urban cities.
Okay.
Those urban cities where crime, this is all public information.
Yeah.
Let's just take Philly, for instance. I think Philly today is 600 police officers short. Okay. And crime is high in the city of Philadelphia. Philly's got a wonderful, well-trained and wonderfully led police department at UPenn. Okay. And even the city. But let's face it, there's some things that there's a lot of risk right now. There's a lot of things that can and will happen in that city until things start to, die down in terms of crime. So,
well, I was surprised to hear you say that in terms of your work with New Haven,
Oh, yeah.
that you are taking your Yale resources
Oh,
and
yeah.
dedicating them to New Haven. I assumed
Yeah.
that you were going to say, oh, yeah, New Haven is bringing some of their resources to us. That makes sense now that they're, you have more resources through the university, like financially.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I'm imagining that it doesn't always have to go in that direction. It could be a collaboration. It could be some kind of like grant work. There are lots of different ways that you can
Yeah.
fund these collaborations. It's just a matter of, you're saying, to be working together to create and have different universities work together so that they can educate each other and create best practices together.
So think of August Vollmer, renowned police chief in the city of Berkeley, California. He realized he had a university right there in his city. So you know what he did? He walked over there and he said he worked with them to try to solve problems. And as a result, he was so far ahead of his time, just walking across and just having a conversation with academics. We have to establish better partnerships with our institutions of higher learning, and we have to do problem solving. And there's no one size fits all with it. But I do believe that myself and some others, we know the space, so we can be helpful in helping others do that.
I guess I'm recognizing too now that there's a certain vulnerability. Like you talk about crime on campus, you have these kids who come in who many of them be more potentially affluent than some of the neighboring areas. And people know that they can go in there and grab some computers or whatever.
All college campuses are a target-rich environment. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, which I never considered before, but now I get it.
Oh, yeah.
And then that becomes the responsibility of the city to figure out how they're going to keep crime down in that area. So that's thank you. That's beautiful.
I know that
complexity.
I know that Ronnell has a hard stop in 3 minutes. So
yeah. So we do 3 minutes of gushing and thank yous.
I want him to just give me his give me your best shot. What do you want the world, or at least our world, our audience, to know? While telling Rachel and Warren's story, we also are taking all these dirt roads to talk to people like yourself, who, in our humble opinion, are the best and the brightest, and who really have something to impart to future generations of policing. You mentioned it, but we don't do a good job of sharing our stories to keep on in perpetuity, to learn from lessons from the previous leaders, etc. What would you want future leaders or current leaders in law enforcement to know? Like, what do you want them to know?
So the reason why I have a hard stop is I have to prepare for class tonight. One of the things I learned when I was at the FBI NA from a few folks, Jen being one of them, Dr. John Vincent being another one, they both had their PhDs. And, what I learned is, especially going through police reform the last few years, getting in front of students whenever you can, getting in front of young people where you can, and being honest with them about those that want to get into policing, being honest with them about what this job is and what they're getting into. At the end of the day, your practical experience is what they want to hear about. And going through what we've gone through, it's only going to help them see themselves in this work. I said before, if not us, then who? If we don't get in front of young people, because let's face it, a lot of young people don't want to get into policing anymore. But if a Jen Morrison or Ronnell Higgins doesn't get into the classroom and start to relate, goes back to being relatable, relate to these young people and sharing experiences, the good and the bad, and helping them find their place in this profession. If we don't do that as practitioners, who's going to do it? I'm a practitioner in residence at the University of New Haven by design. And I enjoy being in front of those students. And they're going on, some of them are going on to become police officers. It's almost like recruiting into the profession versus recruiting for your department. If not us, then who?
That's right. The work is hard, but I agree with you. That's a great question. If I hang it up tomorrow, who's coming in my wake? And if there's someone far better and obviously prepared, then I'll get the hell out of the way.
Yeah.
But there's such a need for competent, authentic, compassionate leadership in American policing that I'm glad you're not completely leaving the field.
Right now, Jen, this is our work to do.
Yep.
This is our work to do.
Well, I'm so honored to meet you and to get to be part of this conversation. And I learned a lot. And Jen, please clarify, do you have a PhD?
I don't have a PhD. He
Oh.
just thinks I'm so smart that he ascribed it to me, a PhD.
Knowing you is he's getting a PhD, knowing you.
It's like a PhD.
Yeah.
I do have a master's
She's a doctor of
degree.
something.
I'm not a doctor, but I sleep with one at night. So it's kind of the same. Ronnell, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Oh, thank you. You guys have made my day. I can jam with you guys anytime. This was great.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. You take care. Bye-bye, guys.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, Ronnell.
If you or someone you know is connected either personally or as the result of violent crime to Alfredo Prieto, a convicted rapist and killer who lived in and around San Bernardino, California, Arlington, Virginia, and Jamaica, Queens, New York between the years of 1984 and 1990, we'd like to hear from you. Please email us at info@theheromakerpodcast.com.
That was a wonderful, wonderful introduction. I really learned a lot.
Oh, good.
He really has, so similar perspectives as you, but I got a lot of life. I was like taking personal life notes down, but I think I gained a lot of knowledge about campus safety and on-campus policing, and also the relationship between the city and the university and the vulnerabilities that are just kind of built into a city campus.
Yeah, town-gown relations are an inherently difficult situation. I don't know if I've told you that for about 6 or 8 years, I was the commander of the Hill section in Burlington. So that was my patrol district that I was responsible for. And it was a section that involved the University of Vermont portions of the campus, the hospital, the level 1 trauma center for the area, a bunch of off-campus sororities and fraternities, and a ton of off-campus residential housing that was filled with student renters, and a lot of friction in the communities about why isn't the college doing something about their off-campus students? Town-gown relations are a very unique field, and everything he said was the stuff I experienced in Burlington and the University of Vermont. And I loved hearing his perspective. You know what I loved a lot? I loved the way he talked about his father and how his father left the job brokenhearted.
Oh my God.
And
what his brother went through, and the way that like there was still animosity. I mean, of course, I mean, it makes sense. It makes more sense than them welcoming him to New Haven with open arms,
Right.
But it really like created his course in life.
Oh, and everything happens for a reason. Like we know that, and he knows that, I'm sure. It worked out exactly right so that Ronnell Higgins could become one of the preeminent law enforcement leaders in campus policing. And we're all better for it. And I'm confident that New Haven community and Yale community are better for it. His repeated refrain of tragedy trumps tradition is true. Not just in campus policing, but I think actually in a lot of American workplaces. I loved that interview.
I think everything should trump tradition, personally.
Right on.
Let's deal with now. I think it can really cloud being able to see the present.
Oh, sure.
And
policing is a very tradition-based profession. There are many others that are also in that vein.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, I think, takes an extra accelerator of critical thinking to break out of tradition and to not allow ourselves to be roped into that we've always done it this way, so we're going to continue to do it this way. And that has been one of the greatest challenges of the last 30 years of the time of my career, has been being willing to be a critical thinker and examine the why behind the how we do things. Why are we doing it this way? And are there better ways? I think now about the way we do much better at trauma-informed interviewing of victims of crime. That wasn't a thing 35 years ago.
I do have a problem with the saying, though, because I also feel like tragedy can sometimes push us in the wrong direction when we're just responding to tragedy.
Oh, just emotion-based?
Well, not necessarily emotion-based, but people can push through their agendas.
I agree with you that tragedy can breed opportunity And if you are not a critical thinker, as Ronnell was talking about, some of these agendas can be advanced because people are operating from a place of emotion and knee-jerk reaction and fear, as opposed to taking a wholesome view of the environment and making course corrections as opposed to throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
So I think you're quite right to point out that tragedy can be equally as dangerous.
Yeah, if you don't,
as it is
what you're talking about, like critical thinking and looking at all sides and taking a holistic view and including as many stakeholders as possible, like that kind of thing, which it seems like Ronnell is doing. He's on the forefront of that right now. Very exciting guest. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I love your law enforcement celebrities.
Yes. I mean, that is one thing about this career. I'm sure it's true in the film industry, and maybe it is in other industries, but I have to tell you, the truly good friends that you make in this career, those friendships are sticky. They don't end. They don't go away just because you get promoted or you change police departments or you retire. That is one of the beauties of policing, is that the brother and sisterhood that is developed is legit and it's forever.
Thanks to sound mixer and podcast producer Michael Doherty, sound designer Andy Bill of Submachine Audio, and graphic designer Jungleen Bay. Thanks also to me, Hero Maker director and producer Andrea Schreeman. Please subscribe to the show where you listen to podcasts and take a moment to rate us. It really helps the podcast grow. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Hero Maker Pod. Want to collaborate or suggest a guest? Please email us at media@theheromakerpodcast.com. The Hero Maker Podcast is a production of Prudent Pictures. Thank you so much for listening.